Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God. You are our strength and our salvation. Amen. Let us be still and know that God is. God was also in the beginning. And when all of our human striving has ceased, God will still be. From everlasting to everlasting, only God is God, the one who holds our beginnings and our endings, the one who is love itself, the one from whom nothing can separate us. In this spirit, we have gathered in the presence of the living God. Amen. Can we be like drops of water falling on the stone, splashing, dispersing, weaker than stone by far? But be aware, as time passes, the rock will wear away and the waters return. George and I live across the street from the Puritan Lawn Memorial Park in West Peabody. We love to take walks there in the park. It's one of those memorial parks that doesn't have big headstones, just small. So there are meadows and all kinds of wonderful things, and every season has its incredible glory. But one of the little memorial areas that I love the most is dedicated to children who have died. And in it, there is a rock that is bigger than me. This rock was imported from Italy, it says on a little thing. And it was part of a waterfall at one point. And in this rock, it's so big, and yet there is this dent in the top. And then there's a little hole. And the hole goes through, and in front of the rock, there's this opening, and water comes right out of the rock through the top in, reminding us that even if we are but a drop of water falling on the stone, change can happen. Galatians tell us about perseverance, telling us to stay with it to the harvest. Do not give up. Sometimes this is a difficult thing for us, and yet in our community, this is what we are called to do. Can we be like those drops of water? You know, Jesus was very aware that stones were not necessarily what they seemed to be. When he walked into the temple for the first time, he said this, and got everybody angry, of course. He said, "See these great stones? Not one will be left standing on another." Well, was not the most popular guy that day at the temple, but he reminded us that empires come and go, and that the empire is not the final word. Sometimes we have a really important lesson to live into. The empire is not the final word, and Jesus is teaching us another way to be. You know, it's very early in the scriptures that the image of the body with many members has been always lifted up for us, that each has its dignity, each has its part. The body is one with all its divisions, if you will, but each part is not to be divided, but actually to be seen as part of the whole. And Jesus also was the first one, or in scriptures we read in Matthew 24, "A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand." That's actually biblical. A lot of times we hear these quotes and people say, "That's in the Bible, isn't it?" And it's like, no, it's actually not in the Bible. But this one is in the Bible. And of course, Lincoln is the person we think of the most when we hear that. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. We are united, and we are to find the one body of which we are all a part. This past Thursday, of course, we celebrated our independence. Incredible celebration of this country standing for ideals and principles. E Pluribus Unum was one of the first kind of mottos for this country. And it means out of many, one. Out of many, one. So that is our principle. That is our idea, that we are to have one vision that all the parts are able to discuss, talk about, work with, and create this vision of hope. It's not an easy vision. This inclusive vision, if you will, is one that Christians have. Jesus, there he was, told the story about the Samaritan, the most hated of all the tribes. Told the story about the Canaanite woman, pagan, who was listened to and included. Told the stories about the widows, the orphans, who were cast aside in the society, saying we must listen and bring them in. Told the stories about tax collectors, the people we hated the most, and prostitutes, whoa, the worst, included, welcomed at his tables. This is the vision of the Christian life. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. It's a difficult vision, but one that really, E Pluribus Unum, grew out of this vision, that out of many can become one. Now, Mother Teresa told us this a long time ago when she said, the reason we have no peace is we have forgotten. We have forgotten that we belong to one another. We belong to one another. This is the new vision Jesus gives us. Will, in his email blast on Thursday, or Wednesday it was, put it so beautifully when he said, the conceiving of our nation began millennia ago in the Middle East when the idea came that people and God were intimate and would have an intimate relationship. It was a novel idea at the time. And it was established that God's higher order and principles were the things that we were to follow. Principles and purpose, as opposed to bloodlines or military conquests. Military conquests were not the ways that God has established nations. It was about principles. It was about one. It was about inclusion and loving, learning to love one another. Amazing, isn't it? When we think about those were the seeds that started this whole idea that it isn't militaristic rights that bring us together. How far we have fallen, if you will, when on our 4th of July, it isn't about military rights. It's about principles of inclusion, of being willing to have dignity and respect for human beings. Well, we've come a long way, as Will had said in his thing, and we've got a long way to go. We've come a long way, and that is wonderful and good news. And we have a long way to go, which is also kind of good news. You know, the Declaration said all men are created equal, and now we believe all human beings are created equal. There's an ever greater call for freedom and justice and hope. As our friend Julianne Zimmerman has said, talent is equally distributed. Opportunity is not. And I love that statement. Thank you, Julianne, for that. You know, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. What about opportunities? How does a farm boy from South Dakota digging in the dirt end up preaching here, 40 years later? Because of opportunities. Those opportunities are not necessarily given to everyone. And every day there is gratitude in my heart for opportunities. Can we give others these opportunities? Do we close the doors? Do we decide, no, they shouldn't have opportunity? How is it that we can discuss this civilly and with love in our hearts? But to follow Jesus is to follow these principles. It's really to follow the ways that he showed us about love one another as I have loved you, laying down your life for another, being willing to actually open our hearts that wide that we can offer that. Martin Luther King put it this way. He said, "And with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope." Hew out of the mountain of despair. Some days it feels like a mountain of despair. But he tells us with this in mind, with this faith, we can hew out of that mountain of despair a stone of hope, the possibility of new life. Dangerous? Sure. Foolish? Some would say so. Vulnerable making? You bet it is. Infuriating? Sometimes. Confusing? Probably most of the time. But with God's discernment, we begin to get the clarity we need. What is my step today toward peace, toward recognition of another, toward opening the heart? What is my step this day? Can there be a new independence, if you will, an independence from seeing ourselves in isolation from each other? It's kind of a new independence, independent from seeing myself as isolated from everybody else, as isolated from anyone, really, and understanding Jesus' vision is to follow and understand this more fully. We bear one another's burdens. That's what Galatians tells us. Bear one another's burdens. John Winthrop, the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, put it this way, and this is, of course, based on a Christian principle. He said, "We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, laugh together, cry together, always having before our eyes our community as members of the same body." We must be persistent in our hope. Can we be like drops of water falling on a stone, splashing, breaking, dispersing in air, weaker than stone by far? But be aware that as time passes, the rock will wear away and the waters return. Amen.